additional infrastructure that the city would likely take a lead on, things like, bump outs or, things that are in the right of way. So I guess, to what degree have we evaluated that, and what's the price tag on that, or do we know anything on that?
So I think we've probably just started to maybe evaluate that. I don't think we have prices, for example, so we don't see a lot of those things, listed here, to your point, Counselor. But I think the traffic signal prioritization preemption software is technology that we have priced out, and we do, I think have a pretty solid game plan around. So that's why we've prioritized that here. But to your point, we'd have to take those steps to price out those other pieces of infrastructure. There might be other things the city can do. That's true.
And then going back to the traffic signal optimization, there would be obviously required participation from Centro in terms of putting that technology on their buses, and I assume there'd be costs from their perspective. Are they going to do that?
So we had a meeting on this last week, and I don't think Neil Burke is here. No. Oh, he's on his way. He was actually in that meeting, but my understanding is they're very much at the table and helping to take the lead on this. To your point, they're going to have to equip all of their buses, and so that's the cost that they would bear. And so there was a meeting last week. A few folks from the city were there, Neil, and as well as folks from our fire department, and then Centro and folks from the technology companies that provide the software, just to begin to talk through that. So our expectation would be that the cost to equip the buses is obviously the cost that Centro bears.
Other questions on this?
Jen, yes. So is this idea fairly new to put the money? I'm looking at our capital improvement plans that were laid out until 2027. Was this part of the DPW's?
I'm honestly not sure, Counselor. I think Neil would have to answer that question. Or Corey, do you know?
No, I don't believe the signal optimization was on there. I mean, the interconnect projects are ongoing. The interconnect projects are ongoing and are usually in the capital plan, but I don't know that we had signal optimization in there.
So this is sort of like a good thing to do that we're deciding on?
Yes.
Now there's not a situation where we're bypassing state money for something?
No, I mean, and we're pursuing, and I know that others have been involved in conversations with Albany to figure out what state funding and other grant opportunities Albany leverage to try and implement their BRT. So, we're in conversations with DOT and Mary Robeson and her team are involved in these two, just to make sure that we're leveraging all funding opportunities for this.
Because obviously globally, this is probably, not globally, what am I talking about globally? But
Why not?
I'm just thinking about the infrastructure plans going to be passed maybe today, hopefully. If we designate this for ARPA money, would we be able to shift it over to infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, I think, not to speak for Frank or anybody, but I think the ARPA plan is a plan. And obviously, if the infrastructure bill comes in, that might open a whole new door of opportunities that we initially had planned to spend ARPA funds on. There he is.
Neil.
That we might be able to spend.
Look,
Don't sit down. Don't sit down.
Our traffic guy. By the way, was the traffic bad, Neil? That's why you're late.
Did you get caught up at lights or anything? Yeah. So the ARPA plan is a plan. Obviously, it's, the money isn't spent until we come to the council, get authorization and spend it. So if we need to adjust the plans because, things that we put on there are going to be paid for through the infrastructure funding, or if our state or federal delegation comes through with a different source of funding so that we don't need to use ARPA, then, we can always reallocate it to some other need.
Yeah, I mean, because it's a significant expense, obviously, 2.5.
Yes.
I'm just wondering if there's other avenues, and all of a sudden this sort of appears, and it wasn't on the capital improvement plan.
Right.
That's the reason I question it.
Right.
So I just wanted to make that clear.
Okay.
Can I follow up to that?
Sure.
One of our state delegates kind of asked a question that he alluded to: why not go to the state for this money? Why use ARPA funds? Mm-hmm. And this was a state elected who said as much. Has any discussion happened?
So I believe the signal optimization has been put in our legislative asks. to the state and and our federal partners to say, hey, if there's funding available, we would like to do that. And obviously, between Neil, Owen, and the engineering team, we're always looking at TAP or CMAQ, or there are other funding sources that become available, so that if we don't need to use ARPA funding, we don't want to use ARPA funding. We'd like to leverage the other opportunities. I think this money is to try and, obviously demonstrate our investment in wanting to make it happen. But if we are able to, whether it's through the infrastructure bill, whether it's through some other funding source, we'd much rather use that money and use ARPA for something else. It's just, that's not a sure thing.
I guess so this can move forward with or without the larger BRT plan, right? I mean, the signal optimization can happen with regular Centro buses as it is now.
I'll defer to Jen and Neil. And
Yeah, so there are some equipment outlays that are part of this, but they're relatively modest. Most of it is back-end programming, larger pieces of infrastructure related to the signal itself. So a bus can use it. Fire already has some of this equipment. Theirs would be upgraded very modestly, but it's not a wholesale reboot. It's adding select pieces onto the existing system, and that's sort of what it's designed to do, sort of just add layers over time.
Just ask a quick technical question, Neil. Like, so when we say optimization, like James Street corridor, for example, would that mean that you would get greens for 7 blocks in a row? I'm just wondering what optimization actually means. Like, does it mean it slows it down every 3 lights, or what is?
That's a great point. Optimization in this sense is related to emergency services and transit. So you as the motorist, you're not going to get a wave of green from Jamesville or from Thompson Road to OCC. Like that is not part of the equation here. What this does, it allows fire to preempt a red, meaning they can change a signal from red to green because they've got to get somewhere. When it comes to transit, they're a slightly lower priority. So it won't flip the light for transit, but it will extend that green phase, and that allows the transit operators to make up a good chunk of change on each route through each intersection. So that's the part that pays dividends. And there's no conflict between emergency services and transit with this system, but it does allow our routes to speed up. And, it may only be 5-10 minutes a route, but that times 30 routes a day, seven days a week, that really, really adds up, especially for the ridership.
Will this impact citizens driving at all?
No. You as a citizen, you should see no major delays or major changes to your route.
Unless you piggyback off the green line.
Unless you're trying to, I guess, coast on the back of a bus, but I don't think that's going to get you there any quicker.
Right. Okay, thank you.
So what vehicles can now change a light?
Currently,
Yes.
just
Fire department, right?
fire department.
That's it.
Yes.
This would allow police to do it too?
No.
So what does this allow? This just
Transit.
transit, so this is just buses.
Yes.
So, is Central going to reimburse us for the 2.5, or what are they paying?
Central would have significant capital outlays for their own equipment. If we were to move forward with BRT, they need to purchase more fleet, essentially large buses. That's quite an outlay. But on the city side, we own the signals. So Centro doesn't own the signals. We don't want Centro to own our signals. So if we're going to move forward on BRT, the city does need to put a step forward.
Well, I didn't say we should sell our signals to them. I'm just saying that there should be some sort of reimbursement for the city to do this. I mean, if it's going to benefit them. I mean, larger buses, are you okay with larger buses, Neil?
A larger fleet, yes.
A larger fleet?
A larger fleet.
Numbers of vehicles?
Yes.
Okay. Councilor Green, I mean, seems like a good idea, but it seems like a very expensive new idea, and I'm wondering why it's not in the capital improvement plan when this was submitted to us. So I'm not in favor of, I'm in favor of maybe setting this aside to see if we got maybe infrastructure money or there's other state monies involved. This is my opinion.
Any other questions on this one? Okay, thank you, Neil. So the next one's parking infrastructure, which we've already passed. So I don't know if anyone has any questions on that for how it's going so far, but if not, we'll move on to the next one, which is broadband access.
All right, so our plan for broadband access, I think everyone is aware that broadband is an explicit allowable expense in the ARPA rule, and I think everyone is also aware that we continue to have a pretty significant challenge as a city with digital divide, meaning between 25 and 30% of our households lack high-speed internet access. Or the ability to get high-speed internet access. So the idea behind this funding for broadband is really to help identify some solutions that the city could sponsor to essentially enable or help, in particular, low-income households to achieve broadband internet access. That could be a combination of things. It could mean laying some fiber ourselves. It could mean investing in other types of solutions, such as CBRS, which is a solution that companies like JMA, for example, manufacture devices and equipment to support. So there's a number of different solutions. One of the next steps that we would entertain around this proposal is to actually put out an RFP to solicit the market for specific ideas around the types of solutions and the type of investment we could make, and then we could evaluate that further to figure out exactly what we might want to do. But I think this is a type of investment that would go a long way in starting to close that 25% digital divide that we know exists. And so that's sort of the thought behind this broadband initiative.
Are you in the process of identifying these solutions and ideas, or is that something that's already?
No, so we're in the process of drafting an RFP that, like I said, we would put out and solicit basically responses from the private sector, from the telecommunications firms. Like I said, companies like JMA provide solutions that are in this space. They're sort of a combination of telecommunications providers and other technology firms that enable connected solutions. So we'd look to see competing proposals and figure out what we think are the right types of infrastructure to invest in, but it would be an infrastructure investment for sure, whether it's a combination of fiber, antennas, what have you.
So the ideas come from the RFPs. It's not that you have guidelines for them to then write.
Right, so we have ideas. So for example, we have data that shows which neighborhoods or census tracts have the biggest challenge with internet connectivity today. So we know geographically which parts of the city are struggling with connectivity to households. And so we have some goals around getting, certain parts of the city connected first and foremost. We would put that out to say, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to achieve higher rates of broadband access in these parts of the city. So, we'd look to the telecommunications firms to tell us how to potentially achieve that, because there probably are a myriad of solutions that we could achieve, and we'd want to evaluate which ones are most cost effective.
My questions on this are, so this would just be providing the infrastructure so people could tap into the networks. It wouldn't be providing like a municipal broadband type system or free Wi-Fi for
it would be providing service to a certain number of households. We've done some back of the envelope math to suggest how far a budget of $5 million would go. Again, it's going to depend on the type of solution we deliver, but we believe a $5 million investment connects about 2,500 households, which is a pretty significant chunk of that digital divide. So we have, like I said, those ideas in mind, like guiding principles, but we need to see what, the different solution providers come back with. I think a lot of cities right now are deciding to invest in the infrastructure because they want to have a little bit more control to enable households to access, as opposed to just leaving it up to the private market, since I think we know there have been some challenges with, obviously, that in the past. So that's kind of the thinking. But this would basically provide 2 to 3 years of service, and then we'd have to figure out how to sustain that. So it's a good question. I mean, right now, most of the other state cities, I think the federal government has some parameters around this for some of their broadband subsidy programs that they've put out. I mean, they tie them very closely to participation in other social programs. So if you're on food stamps, if you kind of meet certain criteria, and it's usually tied to your socioeconomic situation. So I think we'd look to come up with what those criteria are, and then we'd likely look to outsource the management of the service itself. I don't think the city necessarily wants to be an internet service provider, but there are companies that provide service, so we could contract for the actual management of the service to the household.
And buy the devices as well, because if those particular households, if they can't afford the
We
service,
do.
they probably won't be able to afford the device. So you'll buy computers.
So this doesn't cover the cost of computers, but we're working with a group which is being led by a number of the librarians in the region. I think they're called the Central New York Digital Inclusion Network. They're proposing a digital navigator program, which a couple of other cities have launched in the last few months. Part of that is to identify low or no cost devices for households. So we'd look to kind of marry up the service provision with programs like that help work with households to help provide them with devices, or work through the libraries, which currently do device rental and that sort of thing. We know there's a problem with, obviously, device access, as well as even just digital literacy and knowledge of how to use the internet or things like that. And so the Digital Navigator program is a key to that, because they actually provide hands-on training and technical assistance to folks who are trying to use the internet maybe for the first time.
Are there other cities that you're looking to that have implemented a program like this, or implemented stuff like this that we can look to understand a little better?
Yeah, there's quite a few. So, of course, when many of the larger cities got the CARES Act money about a year ago, many of them used their CARES money to undertake efforts like this. And so Tucson, for example, was one of the first to do a pretty extensive broadband access solution. They actually contracted with JMA Wireless. So we've been talking to JMA about their experience in Tucson, for example, to get ideas. There have been about a dozen or so cities that have really undertaken this themselves, because they recognized that, the private providers in their area just weren't really able to address the digital divide sufficiently. So that's kind of what they did. And then, as I said, now there's a number of communities that are implementing these digital navigator programs to provide the complementary services, the devices, the technical assistance, so people get trained on how to use the internet. Charlotte actually has a really nice digital navigator program that's that we're looking to model after.
So Jen, I mean, obviously this ARPA money can only be spent in certain census tracts. So, correct?
No, so the ARPA money for something like broadband could be spent citywide.
Citywide.
Broadband is an allowable expense for us.
Because
Yeah.
I imagine the more well-off census tracts already have
Right.
access.
Right.
So we're talking 2,500 households, and that won't cover everybody who needs it?
No, so like I said, we're based on the data that we have. We think it's probably between 25 and 30% of the households, which is about 12,000 households, right? If you go out based off the latest census.
So it would basically cost 10 times as much to do everybody.
To do everybody.
Well, I mean, I just, to Councilor Allen's point, I mean, how do you select the 2,500 that are going to get this? I mean, I would like to see, actually, to tell you the truth, I would like to see more money spent on something like this. I mean, this
Right.
obviously lends itself more, in my feeling, to the,
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why it is one of the allowable expenses, I think, in the legislation. And I think the thing that we need to try to do is just to pilot some solutions and see what works, right? So that's kind of I think the middle ground we were trying to achieve is, a sizable enough investment to start with that we could make a real impact, but start to actually test this to see if this is something we want to invest more in. So this, maybe addresses a quarter to a fifth of, what we think is the size of our digital divide. But we're not going to know, I think, until we start to pilot solutions to figure out what's scalable, what's best to implement in larger parts of the city, that sort of thing. So this could just be a starting point. But to your point, Counselor, it's probably not the only solution or the full solution.
You agreed with Councilor Hogan that it would be 5 times as much or 10 times as much, I'm sorry, in terms of cost to go citywide?
No, I don't think it's 10 times as much. So like I said, we believe this covers about 2,500 households. We believe the size of our digital divide is about between 10 and 12,000 households. So this is probably a quarter. So not 10 times, maybe 3 to 4 times.
Yeah, because I remember JMA quoted 20 million.
Yeah.
To do the build out.
Yep.
Understanding that this is a pilot program, has any consideration been given to a long-term idea what it could look like? Obviously, that's part of the pilot testing.
Right.
But also, any communication about this kind of being treated as a utility?
Yeah, so, it's, there are a few different ideas that are kind of out there. And again, I think we've got a few different communities to look to who are really out in front trying to figure the stuff out too. I will say the one thing that a lot of other communities are looking at doing potentially is utilizing or leveraging the same infrastructure to provide some of the connectivity requirements for example, city departments and others that we currently, spend obviously money on commercially provided services today. That could subsidize the cost of free or reduced cost service that we would maybe provide, to households or other, types of companies, small businesses, what have you. So that seems to be an idea that's gaining a lot of traction in certain places. I think we'd have to think about those types of things if we really wanted to try to scale this up and come up with a sustainable solution. But the same technology or the same infrastructure that gets built to really support more connectivity in our neighborhoods could certainly be leveraged for applications that we as a city, for example, would need connection for. And so I think that's where the added value of the investment comes into play, and that's what probably helps us to subsidize or to sustain this even after the ARPA funds are, spent.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the idea. When you talk about long-term sustainability, it seems more likely if it was kind of seen as a utility as
Right.
opposed to the option to use it or not being there. Which I don't think people will argue with if
Right.
it's affordable.
Yeah, I think there definitely are some communities that are looking, to provide the service at some cost. So, maybe not $15 or $20 a month, which is what, the lower end packages cost through the private providers, but, $5 a month, $7 a month for high-speed internet. That's arguably pretty cost-effective, for most families, but it does support the cost of providing the service a little bit more than offering no cost service. So we would certainly, I think, look to get feedback from all of you and the community about what makes the most sense. But yeah, there's a number of, I think, different models that we could look at, and we try to, I think, test out as a part of a pilot to figure out, to your point, Counselor, how to sustain it.
Yeah, $5 wouldn't be sustainable. You would have to go as high as $50, which is much better than the
Right.
$123 that most people are
Right.
All right.
Yep. Any other questions?
Biggest concern, it's $5 million. It feels like a really big project that should be someone's full-time job or two people's full-time job. And that's just my biggest concern is our ability to deliver on this, which is not a question, but that's my general concern is how we're going to make sure this happens. So
Yeah, noted. We are trying to work through that too. It's a very good point.
And you'll let us know how that works out, correct?
Oh, we will, yeah, for sure.
Okay, any other questions on this one? Okay,
All right, thank you.
thank you. The next one is the Interstate 81 Project Community Engagement and Planning.
Good morning, counselors. Your point about capacity is the purpose for this item. The city needs to build its capacity around management, advocacy, coordination around everything that's about to happen with 81. In particular, we're working right now, Councilor Driscoll has been involved with an RFP to identify design, urban planning, and design professionals as we look at what is being proposed by the DOT and what design professionals in a larger capacity can help us identify what is best for the city of Syracuse in conjunction with what we already have with the DOT. We also are very concerned about the land that's going to be available and how the city believes wholeheartedly that that should be conveyed to us. A community land trust is an idea that's been floating around that we support. We want to build capacity to be able to advocate and support for that. This line item, and while we have not nailed down exactly what areas of capacity around staffing we need, we just know that we are going to need it, particularly as construction on the viaduct itself happens, the coordination of the communication with the community. We know just from all the great work that when it's all said and done is going to have great roads downtown, how it's been navigating downtown. So we can only imagine what is about to come down the pike for the viaduct when it comes down. But the planning before that, the coordination not only for communication, but also for our departments, fire and police, and all of those vital services we have. So this line item speaks exactly to what you just said, Councilor Green, around capacity for the city.
Staffing already seems a bit overwhelmed. So would you guys be hiring somebody to do this, or are you trying to pull people from other departments?
We would be trying to build capacity with new, whether it's consultants or staffing.
Gotcha.
So is the idea to have a direct City of Syracuse employee that'd be hired to work on this, or would it be a mixture of consultants, or what's the?
It would be a mixture. We definitely feel the need to have a 81 oversight individual that particularly is coordinating all of the department needs. But we definitely see it probably as a combination of both. We're working on an RFP now for one component of that as a consultant.
So in the scenario where we hired someone directly, what's the type of background that we'd be looking for?
We'd definitely be looking for a higher executive level individual that understands relationships with government, relationships with interconnectivity around departments. Also that has some, probably some background, infrastructure background, possibly. I don't want to engineer possibly. We don't want to nail exactly who we're looking for. We know they have to have multiple, those qualities. We're looking for the impossible person.
How would the workflow through, because you already have the community engagement planning with Blueprint, McCormick Barron, Syracuse Housing Authority. So how does that relationship look with this person that we would hire?
This individual or individuals, depending on how we design this, would be absolutely engaged with multiple groups. The idea is to ensure that the city is knowing what multiple groups are doing and communicating with multiple groups about what the city's position and efforts are.
Deputy Mayor, we're pretty cohesive with the state. And the reason I asked that is I got a call from a property owner on the West End. The state made him an offer for his property on the 81 thing. And,
Right.
he told me, but I just was wondering if we're aware of all that.
Yeah, the big table effort that we've been implementing through Greg Lowe's work has really brought stakeholders to the table, including the DOT. Those letters went out. We've received communication from many of those individuals. Greg has pretty much been the person in the front for the city, for the DOT. That just is not feasible going forward as this thing begins to ramp up. So we definitely need an individual that, particularly when we talk about the impact on constituents, one individual that all sources of information can flow in and out of.
Because rumors like that flowing through neighborhoods could cause it.
Absolutely, cause all kind of unjust angst or justified angst that we need to address. But we need a clear line of communication. Greg is doing an amazing job right now, but again, this is a once in a generation project, and we need to put the resources behind its management.
Would the plan ultimately include like a real plan of like the land that's right there underneath the viaduct as from a city's perspective of what we want? Are we gonna hire somebody to design that and present that to the state?
So currently, what is proposed in the draft environmental impact study does not convey the land to the city of Syracuse. We absolutely, in our responses to the DOT, we would encourage the council to do that as well, is that we really are advocates for that land being conveyed to the city of Syracuse, and for, in the form of a community land trust, some community control over what's done with it. But right now, we don't have control over it.
I mean, outside of the obvious concern for the land use immediately under the viaduct, the construction project in itself requires that we reconfigure our traffic patterns, right? I forget the mathematics course that deals specifically with traffic patterns and congestion. I forget the name of it.
Right.
But has there been, or maybe the question is, why are we not doing that now to deal with, for example, when they take the first section down,
Right.
you know, Salina Street, State Street, the University, the congestion is going to be so bad. And I remember at one point there was construction on the viaduct. This was some years ago. And what would normally be a 5-minute drive down Salina Street took 45 minutes.
Right.
You know, it took 10 minutes to get across the street because the traffic was so nonstop. So, I mean, are we doing anything now to prepare for even the deconstruction of the viaduct?
Yes, I mean, Council, you bring up a great point. That is a huge concern of ours. Just the great work being done over there with JMA caused all kind of havoc around, you know, Tallman and Salina for a long period of time. Working with Neil and working with some community members, we got a traffic light there to help with that flow of traffic. This money will help us be able to build our capacity to be in front of this conversation. Right now, our traffic person is Neil, and this is the city of Syracuse, to Councilor Allen's point, existing staff is so stretched. We have to build that capacity in those areas. So there are multiple heads thinking about this constantly other than Neil's, who's thinking about traffic patterns and traffic all the time.
Yeah, because it seems like we should be doing that now, to be quite frank. I know there was talks before about reducing congestion by turning one ways to two ways. Clinton Street, for example, I believe Adams Street as well. There were a couple of others. But like, you know, one thing that I think some people are not considering for, you know, you take the first piece of the viaduct down.
Sure.
You know, or, you know, let's say you take it down. You now literally have to travel Brighton to get to the east side. You got to travel Hawley, maybe a little further north to get to the east side, because there's an entire area that you won't be able to transit.
As you can imagine, fire is at the front of that conversation.
Yeah.
You know, actually even thinking about their own internal infrastructure, because their trauma, their priority one firehouse is the one right on the west side of where the viaduct is coming down, and building their capacity to be able to serve the other side of the viaduct. So they absolutely have been on top of this discussion, because it really affects their ability to get to fires and not lose time, because that entire opportunity not using the viaduct, but actually cutting through Almond Street or Genesee is going to be impeded.
And the hospital is on the other side, so they're gonna have to go all the way around just to even get to upstate if they're coming from right there.
Or the conversation with Upstate on whether they're going to build trauma capacity in another section of town.
Some of that, they're gonna have to move. You know, so it's just some of that, they'll have to temporarily move those services. Same way that people on the other side of the highway will have to vacate their properties or their living spaces for a certain amount of time.
Yep.
You know, just owning expertise, it would seem though, that maybe between like Neil and engineering, some of that, you know, and even fire, that some of that consideration for how to reconfigure the traffic could kind of, you know, not assuming it's not happening now, but can kind of be happening now, which would save on a lot of costs.
Right.
People you would have to hire to do it later. And so, you know, that's just something to consider.
Yep. The conversation has been happening, but needs to happen at a larger capacity. Absolutely.
Action behind the talk. We need like a real plan. Because I'm concerned. I live on Garfield. I'm not even going to be, it's going to take me forever to leave my house.
Yep.
So just thinking of like an alternate route to even get downtown is going to be a pain.
Yep. And the action behind the cost, right, frankly, is it takes some capacity building for the city.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Next one is water infrastructure.
Good morning, Commissioner Awald for water. Got several projects here. You want me to go through them one by one, or?
Yeah, at a high level. Why don't you do each one?
Sure. So just before we start off, all these projects are in our capital improvement plan.
I was just checking, Commissioner.
So, first one is the intake, extension of the intake construction in Skinny Atlas Lake. That is the extend intake number 2 into deeper waters to help avoid turbidity violations. It's been on the books, something we studied in 2004 and back in 2018. It's a long-term project, big project. Any questions on that?
Can you remind me the total cost? Isn't it, it's like 13 million?
It's around, $12 to $13 million total cost.
Okay. And the rest of the money comes from
So
bonding?
we're going to use a portion of the money for design and beginning of construction. You'd have to bond or search for grants or other infrastructure money in the future to actually construct it. But at least we could get the design underway, because that's going to be about a year and a half process.
Okay. Other questions on this? Okay.
All right, the next one is the Guilford, Brookford, and Westminster pump station upgrade or replacement projects. All these pump stations were put in either in the 40s and the 50s, have reached their end of life. They're all underground, so we're going to be looking at, if possible, bringing these above ground so they're not confined spaces, and replacing all the equipment, getting in some new telemetry and SCADA equipment so we can see it instead of having to physically put somebody at each pump station to see what's going on. In addition to that, we're going to be replacing water mains around the pump station to include some upgraded water infrastructure. After we upgrade the pump stations, we want to upgrade some of the piping as well. Questions? All right. Okay. Conduit number 3 replacement underneath 9 Mile Creek. Conduit number 3 is a large 36-inch conduit coming from Skinny Atlas Lake to the city. It is the workhorse for bringing the water into the city. Underneath 9 Mile Creek, it is the lowest spot, which is the highest pressure, because our system works on gravity from Skinny Atlas Lake to the city. So think about it as, surface of the water, the deeper you go in water, the greater the pressure gets, similar to this. So it's the lowest point. We've had numerous leaks here over the years. It was put in the 1940s with cast iron pipe. So we want to replace this section underneath the creek so we don't have any, potential catastrophe coming up, and possibly do some pipelining as well. Any questions?
Where exactly is this?
Crossing 9 Mile Creek in Camillus area.
And what's the total cost on this one? Does this cover a good percentage of it?
This covers the total cost.
Okay.
The only one of these doesn't cover the projected total cost would be the intake. So all these would be covered in full. Skinny Atlas Weir is a weir we use to measure the flow we let into Skinny Atlas Creek as part of our DEC requirements with taking water from Skinny Atlas Lake. We got to maintain a certain water flow in the creek for the fish. This was last updated in 1980. We did an updated study on it. It's reached its end of life. There's a lot of erosion happening in the creek and around this weir. This also doesn't have the safety features I would like for our employees to go measure the creek depth. That's so we can measure how much flow is maintaining in the creek. Any questions on that one?
Okay.
There's one more that's not on here that's going to be in committee. It's the Mosley Pump Station and water main replacement. I don't know if you want to talk about that now since we're here.
Yeah, sure.
So that one's, we have already went out for design RFP, received the bids. We're going to be reviewing that on, I think, Monday. So this is a pump station upgrade at the Mosley Pump Station. Right now, it's only a pump station that turns on in case there's a fire in the two pressure districts, which we call the intermediate high, which is kind of Eastwood, and the north side. And there's only one pipe connecting both of those pressure districts along Sunnycrest, sorry. Our goal is to make that a daily pump station that would run routinely to help increase the pressure in these districts and also provide a new transmission main along Sunnycrest and provide a redundant one along Glen Cove. That way, in case there's a leak on one or we have to shut one for maintaining, we still have pressure connection between both parts of the district. Any questions?
What's the total cost of that?
That one, total cost of that one, we were estimating about $190,000 in design fees. Total construction cost, we're looking at $3.8 million. So that one would be a partial coverage by the ARPA funds as well.
Any questions on that?
I just think it'd be helpful if you just break down what we're bonding for and what's the ARPA funds for all these projects.
Sure.
You know, just send it to us. And
Yep, I can do that.
you know.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Syracuse build.
So I'm going to take the next two. So Syracuse Build is our opportunity to expand upon what we've seen through Pathways to Poverty, for example. We had almost 400 people, 60 slots. We're going to get 20 slots. We have 60 slots from now to the end of the year and 400 applicants. So this is an opportunity, working along with Center State and CNY Works, to begin to expand the capacity. What we are still working on is exactly how that's going to happen and the time frame that it's going to happen. So I believe we're going to be coming before you officially in September 13th. So between now and then, in committee, we'll be able to lay out specifically how we're going to expand that program to answer what we saw as a response around Syracuse Build, around preparing the workforce for construction-related work. Also, so many moving parts are going on because recently CNY Works received funding from the state. I believe it was $1 million to build capacity around very specific trades and skills-related job opportunities that the DEIS identifies in, that is identified in the DEIS. Specifically, CDL drivers, specifically heavy highway and equipment operators, specifically those in the carpentry trade, very, very specific things to what's needed for the highway. So the model that we've established through Pathways has allowed us to actually work with the unions. We don't know if it's going to be a PLA. If there is a PLA, we're going to need to be able to get people and apprentices into the union. So bringing the unions on through that project. I think that first cohort may be just about done, have been very successful. We'll get interviews into the union process, but we want to expand on that program. That's a drop in the bucket. We're working really hard now through the big table and the workforce engagement group to really nail down. The DEIS lays out how many hours are going to be needed in each skill capacity. We're trying to translate that into living, breathing bodies. We've been cautioned by the DEIS that one particular carpenter the carpentry example may be 3 different various carpentry skills. And that's fine, but I still need to know whether or not Counselor Allen, as a carpenter, may work on 3 different components of 81, but it's still one person. So I need to, we're working with them to condense those hours into bodies so we know more so what we're training on. But this gives us some resources to expand way beyond what we've been able to do right now with the funding.
Deputy Mayor, will there be any possibility to apply some of these monies to collaborations with the non-for-profit that are already doing works of the sort?
Absolutely. I'm meeting with a couple of them tomorrow and on Thursday.
Excellent.
Well, one thing, I think we can probably almost guarantee there'll be a PLA.
Yeah.
Yeah. But while what I'm about to mention did not happen during this administration, it's still a concern of mine.
Okay.
Pathways Out of Poverty specifically. A number of community partners was used for that program
Right.
and were cut off before the money came back.
Absolutely. I remember I was around when that happened.
And that was done by CNY Works. So my concern is, how do we ensure that another X amount of $1 million doesn't get lost in administration, and then the people who it's intended to help get no help?
So,
A lot of people don't know that happened.
well, so I believe I'm going to answer this by saying this. There's a couple pieces to that. So one was, we've been working on strategic planning. Frank is leadership on the board of CNY Works, so we've been working with over a strategic planning process, probably over the last 5 months, really taking a look at the overall operations of CNY Works, particularly looking at the relationship between CNY Works and the One Stop, which is actually the training entity. Also really being engaged. The difference, I believe, between what happened a few years ago and now is that engagement between the city and the county and what's going on with the organization. So with this, not only the labor money that came through, but also the gun violence money that just came through. First person Lenora got on the phone and called, and I met with last week was me to sit down and talk. I probably have met with Lenora and CNY Works more than I ever have, even at Southwest Community Center. We are very much in the business and in the weeds, and that guidance, particularly because it is a joint entity appointed by the mayor and the county exec, who are leaning into this and ensuring that they are not the entity taking the money and running. I was around at that time, Councilor Bay. I remember.
And so it's fair for me to say then, not to put all the weight on CNY Works, because the MDA was involved as well. In fact, they were the lead on that, which is now Center State for those who don't know. But I'm going to call them culprits at that time as well, who had no answers for why Dunbar, Matawan, Jubilee Homes, Gateway, and all those guys were cut out after the application was received and approved. So I just want to, I appreciate your response.
If I could just ask, Deputy Mayor, so do we, so we had 20 spots and 400 applicants recently, is that correct?
We had 20 spots for 400 applicants.
And you believe you can expand to 60?
We think we can get 60 in. Much of that is because of the capacity of the training side of it. To get, the meat of a quality programming, we can hold 20 at a time. So we know we can do 3 cohorts between now and the end of the year. So that would be a total of 60.
That's where I was going with it.
That's not enough.
Yeah, so that's kind of.
It's not fast enough.
There's a bottleneck there in the training. Is that where the big bottleneck is?
It definitely isn't from the people wanting the training. The bottleneck is just the capacity on the other side to be able to do. How can we do multiple cohorts at a time is another example.
That's the union's capacity, or who's?
It is the trainers who are the union right now. And so the conversation would be, what are the other options we can pull together that could provide it? One of the good things about Pathways right now is to have the union trainers there, because they're seeing the candidates firsthand. They're not just taking my word for it. They're training them. That is working really well. But we got to expand and accelerate what we're doing now to be ready for 2 years from now.
And is that what this 2.6 million will go towards?
As a portion of it, we have to continue to look for funds. We need to continue to leverage. I'm hoping that the infrastructure bill will come with also some partnering resources to build capacity for local business and local labor. So we'll be keeping an eye on that as well.
How about outreach for minority groups and so that they're involved in the whole project?
So I would tell you that the first cohort at Pathways, I think, wow, out of 20 people, 80% of them were minority or women.
Okay.
Yeah.
Deputy Mayor, so I'm not sure of all the players here, but
Sure.
I know Local 60 on West Genesee Street, which is the Ironworkers Union, is full to capacity every Thursday night, people being trained for this.
Yeah.
Which gladdens my heart. I love to see that skilled trade, because I know they're getting really good training through the union halls.
Yeah.
So these other players, CNY, where does CNY Works end up in this?
So CNY Works is really our avenue of bringing together. So like the heavy equipment workers and those that are doing the NTTS and that large tractor trailer. As we talked about 81, particularly the viaduct and other components of it, one thing that I've said over and over again is, irregardless of what the DOT ended up deciding, and I'm thankful it was a community grid, we were going to be demoing and hauling a lot of materials. And so there's a need for drivers. There's a need for people who can work heavy equipment, cranes and that type of thing, that can move and maneuver large amounts of debris and replace it with what we're going to have there. The electricians, and of course, they're all, I think we have about 6 partners on board right now.
It's good to hear.
Yep. And they're at the hall training, which is definitely new. The other component of this, Counselor, that we're not ready, and like we said, this is a plan. We were approached by SUNY EOC. They have really been, they own property on McBride, closer to Burt and McBride. And their plan through DASNY and through the state process is to build a tech manufacturing training hub where people can get hands-on right in the neighborhood and provide training on tech manufacturing. Tim approached us because he says they have a new program now that they can leverage, if they can leverage 2-to-1. The state would leverage 2-to-1. It's still in the planning. Jen and I are still working with Tim to really flesh out how he would, his timeline for it. So again, in this plan, it is our priority to be able to support that initiative right in the footprint, right in the neighborhood, with a partner like EOC, who has been a great labor stakeholder for us. But we're not ready with this yet, and we probably will come back just to give you more update about, and invite Tim here to talk about it more. But the idea was to match our $1 to every $2 that the state would provide.
Are the partners that you're talking about logged in? Can you share who they are?
Oh, the partners that we have, I'm meeting this afternoon with Jubilee Homes. Jubilee Homes is going to be presenting at the 81 stakeholder meeting on Thursday. EOC is a partner. Off the top of my head, I'm blanking.
That's fine.
Rita, I'm sorry.
You can send it to us later.
Sorry. Next one.
Yeah, sure, next one.
Okay, the next one is around capacity building. Again, this is a 81 focused or construction career development focused project, is to really look to build the capacity of businesses to be able to, while there are going to be what it sounds like from the DES major contracts, there are going to be a lot of subcontracts. We don't have a huge DBE pool right now, which is an issue for us. So we want to be able to use One Stop to begin to certify DBE companies, build capacity of companies. We have, I haven't seen anything writing, but we asked the county for a one-to-one match for this initiative, and I have a verbal commitment that that's going to happen. And so we were looking at, in totality, a city-county initiative that could be $1 million to build the capacity of minority businesses. We proposed that, and I'll send you all the copy of the proposal that the work group developed around the One Stop. But this is, while the Syracuse build is around labor and workforce, this is about business capacity.
So where would something like this be housed?
So we are proposing to have it at the SSIC. Instead of taking on new overhead, we would use our already existing partner.
This would be somewhere where people could go and get help with opening their business, running their
Opening
business.
we would want to start with established businesses because we don't have a big timeline to get to 81, but there are businesses who need access, some training, some LLC development, financial training. We will be meeting with the credit union for revolving loan funding because people may need equipment. That's a capacity building issue. And it really is about assessing where businesses are and moving them to the next level, at least so they can be in a subcontracting position.
Okay, any other questions on this one? Okay, thank you. I'm committed to getting these done in the next 30 minutes, so we'll try to get through it. The next one's redevelop distressed commercial properties.
Okay, I think I've got the next 5, so maybe we can try to make up the some time. Okay, so the idea behind redeveloping distressed commercial properties, with this funding, I think we'd look to leverage the IDA. So, CIDA has a unique role and an ability to acquire property, to redevelop property, to turn that property back into productive use. So we know that there are a number of commercial properties that are distressed throughout the city, vacant properties that are either in between owners or current owners are tax delinquent, those types of things. We don't yet have this fully designed yet, so we don't have the specific properties in mind. I think the plan with earmarking this money is to acknowledge in certain parts of the city where we know we want to see commercial properties that are currently vacant renovated and getting back into productive use. We would set aside the funds so that as CIDA identifies those properties, money could be made available to help with those projects. So again, I think once we have a specific proposal or specific proposals in mind, at that point we would, I think, submit a letter, and we'd probably come before the Economic Development Committee to really discuss it further. But that's kind of the idea behind the allocation. Happy to answer questions. Okay, I think the next couple of items under recapitalized SEDCO have been discussed in a couple of committee meetings, and I think we even approached it in the last ARPA meeting. I don't know how much time you all want to take. My understanding from an offline conversation with Councilor Bay is that we will hold the SEDCO loan program until the federal government puts out the final rule, so that we know what we're dealing with in terms of the any business loan related rules that might be forthcoming. So if any questions, though, I'm happy to answer them. Okay. The Resurgent Neighborhood Initiative Commercial Corridor Improvement Fund. This is an idea, again, to, allocate about $1 million that we can really dedicate to specific projects for businesses that are on our commercial corridors throughout the city, or for related projects like Councilor Driscoll has been talking to us about the special lighting project in Eastwood, for example. So that would be a major enhancement to that commercial corridor, for example, and our thought is that that would be part of this fund, for example. There might be obviously a lot of other projects on the different corridors. So the idea would be that we, obviously would work with all of you to identify potential projects that could be funded with this money, but we'd be trying to essentially infuse resources on those commercial corridors for facade improvement, for, different investments that will help those businesses that are, that are located on those corridors, or help attract new businesses to some of those corridors, because I think we've got some vacancy on several of our commercial corridors. So that's really the idea behind that fund. Again, other than the special lighting district proposal, we have not yet received specific proposals for this money. So we'd have to work through a planning process. Again, we'd look to work with all of you on that. And so as we identify projects, we would bring those forward, potentially one by one. The other thing we've been considering is whether we create a competitive grant process where we put out sort of an RFP and have folks come to us with their proposals, and we try to do it all at once. So I think we'll be able to come back to you all with a specific suggestion around that in the next couple weeks, but that's kind of the idea for the funding.
Jen, why wouldn't we spend more money on something like this? I've heard Councilor Bay talk about this ever since he's been on the council. I mean, this, and then when you mentioned, and not to criticize you in any way, but competitive grants pitting like Geddes Street against James Street or something like that, I'm not in favor of that. I think there's main commercial corridors, and like I said, I've heard Councilor Bay talk about this forever. Business corridors that we should support, South Avenue, Geddes Street, all those. So why wouldn't we, this $1 million won't go far. Why wouldn't we do like $4 million on something like this? Who makes the decisions and how we prioritize? This not only would benefit the neighborhoods adjacent to them, and those neighborhoods you well know, but would spur economic growth in all those neighborhoods too.
Right. I think we're open to, to working with all of you around the right allocation. Obviously, you total up all of this and it all totals up to 123 million. So I think the question is just, if we're going to put more money in that bucket, then where do we take it from?
I'm okay with taking it from some.
So, sure. So I think that's kind of the feedback we'd look for you all to help us figure out where we take it from. Because, we've obviously had to make a lot of trade-offs with coming up with this whole list, and there's a lot of important priorities on this list. So, but I don't disagree with your point, Councilor, that there's a lot of opportunity to invest in these business corridors. Okay. All right. So the next two items, the Arts and Culture Recovery Fund, again, sort of really a concept for an allocation that we don't have specific projects identified for just yet, but the idea is, acknowledging that arts and culture, provides a means to generate economic activity. It's part of our sort of economic, bucket of initiatives, if you will, in the plan. We know we've heard from so many local artists, local venues, that they are just in a lot of need for support, right? To help get programming back out there, to help generate more, revenue for the arts community in all of our neighborhoods. And so, again, the idea is just that there'd be an allocation with funding made available, and I think the idea would be to work with different community partners to help identify those projects, whatever they may be. It could be commissioning specific artists, for example. I think the Public Arts Commission would play a role in allocating this funding, but that's sort of the idea behind the arts and culture allocation. Again, when we'd have specific projects or a specific plan, we'd come back to you with that idea.
So let's money would just be set aside, but we would have to like, because I think.
Correct.
What some of us went through with the Trailblazers mural, I think that the impact, and I have some criteria that I'll send out to my fellow counselors that we should probably all look at, and I'll send it to you too,
Sure.
John, regarding every specific project and how we spend money on that.
Right. Yeah, I think that's in line with what we were thinking.
So the artist would petition us to actually do the work here,
Correct.
and then we would decide if it's, well, one, it has to be in a public space, and then we would decide how much we're gonna pay them for that project.
Correct.
Okay.
And it'd have to be, the Public Arts Commission would be involved, and certainly the neighborhood groups, because obviously they would have a say in it too, so.
Right.
And then we will build structure around how all of that gets done.
Yeah, we need the structure around it. Obviously, we don't yet have that fully baked, so this was,
I'm confused, because we have the Public Arts Commission, that's structure. I mean, they ask specific questions on how things, so I'm very confused by if we need more structure than the Public Arts Commission.
Well, not every arts project, it's goes through the Public Arts Commission. There's different kinds of art and genders, and so
Right.
we need to be able to be inclusive of all.
Well, any public money would be spent, I mean, obviously, the Public Arts Commission, I imagine, would be involved in it.
yeah, and I think the idea behind the fund was that it could be for more than just public art. So public art might be a piece of it, but it could be for other types of arts and culture events as well, from a tourism perspective and that sort of thing.
Just illuminate me, would you be spending public money for private art? I mean, how's that work?
Well, I mean, certainly, I think there are festivals, for example, so,
Festivals are open to everybody.
right. So my point is, though, other than public art installations, there are other types of arts and cultural events that require public support. So, and I believe previously we had some state funding from Senator DeFrancisco that went to help support some of our local festivals. I believe we haven't found a replacement for that funding yet. So those types of support for festivals and cultural events would also be included in this bucket. So that's
Public
the,
would be open to the public.
right,
I got it.
right. Yeah, so not just public, murals and sculptures and that sort of thing, but actual cultural events.
Thank you.
Sure. And then the City as Canvas, that's truly a public arts initiative. So this idea, I believe, is to work with the TNT and to provide the TNT funding for neighborhood public art installations. So that's where, again, we enable the community to provide feedback on exactly what they'd like to see in the respective neighborhoods and find locations for what would be truly more like public art installations.
If I could just add, TNT meetings, which I go to all the time, do not really represent the entirety of certain neighborhoods.
Sure.
So I would look for more public engagement on every one of these proposed murals.
Okay.
And also, I would like, I think the criteria that I'll send to my fellow counselors should probably be about.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Any other questions? Okay, perfect. I think that's it.
Good job.
So the next item is around public safety. So it is $4 million designated, split $2 million for the fire department, $2 million for the police department. The fire department, as you all are aware, has a training facility off of Hiawatha Boulevard in the city. What we're proposing is actually going to come to you on Thursday, is redeveloping a newer fire tower. Police Chief Mon says that one is old, antiquated, needs to be updated. The methodology that we're going to take is that there is prefabricated building that can be brought here in pieces, and then we would bid out for the actual construction of the erection of the tower. So we would be, and Chief Mons isn't here, but you're going to hear more about this on Thursday, to create this tower.
Why are you laughing?
I'm sad that Chief Mons isn't here. That's okay.
You'll get an earful Thursday.
Yeah.
The other half is the police department. I believe it was you, Counselor Hogan, who talked about ShotSpotter. This is investment in ShotSpotter. We are still getting quotes for expansion of ShotSpotter. First Deputy Chief Cecil is also looking at camera options for us that don't need to be wired, because there are situations where we need to maybe have a mobile camera we can put in an area because we may be seeing a spike. And instead of investing in the camera before we may really need it, we can use these more portable cameras to get them up, get some surveillance over a period of time, and if they need to be moved, then we'd be able to move them, or find out we actually need a permanent wired camera there. We are also setting aside some of this money as we look at non-lethal forms of police enforcement. No one wants to see a situation where we have officers discharging their weapons. The police force does not have a taser program, so we're looking at those as less lethal methods of engagement with folks in the event that they're needed, and we hope they are never needed, but we want to advance that proposal. Body cameras, we have the entire police force outfitted now, but we want to expand that for incoming, not this class, but more incoming, as well expand with our sergeants and our on-the-ground supervisory staff.
The technology in the police departments, those dashboard cams that former city councilor Tommy Seals used to bring up, that's sort of passe and now they're all body, or or how's that?
No, we still want to get dash cams. We think there's another level of not only accountability, but record of engagement for our police department. We're just trying to prioritize, and definitely ShotSpotter and making sure that those that technology is there, making sure we have the cops cameras we need, making sure Chief Buckner is prioritizing the taser technology, and then we are definitely looking at dashboards, so we'll continue looking at that. The other carve out we have in this at about $350,000 is diversionary response. So again, there are many opportunities that we have where armed police officer should not be the first person on the scene. And so I have been working since April with a amazing group of folks, and I think I talked to you about this before. Now we're getting the rubber is meeting the road. We want to launch a pilot, kind of what I seem as an enhancement of what the relationship we have now with Liberty Resources, to expand that to look at 5 days a week, 24 hours a day, what that would cost us. It is not going to be cheap, but we're hoping that we can pilot something to learn this fall from that pilot to know exactly what we need and what that price tag would be.
Deputy Mayor, you said you believe you'll be launching in the fall?
That's our hope, yeah. Yep, that was our commitment, to launch a pilot in the fall. Winter. Yep.
Just going back to fire, and I know Chief Mons isn't here, but I'll preview what my questions will be for him. So
I hope he's watching.
So, I mean, the main thing is, it's easy to say our facility's outdated, but I just want to know comparison. How do we compare it to other cities in terms of our training facility? What are the capacities that we wouldn't have if we don't invest in new facility? What are the alternatives to doing it? And the main reason being, a lot of us have spent a lot of time in the community asking people, how do you want to spend this money? What are your needs? Obviously, no one says new training facility for the fire department, right? So it's a really steep hill to climb to say this is an urgent thing for the city to spend. So
he also says that it would be an opportunity. I don't know how much revenue, but there are other either volunteer or other fire departments that would use it as well.
Mayor, I have one question. Just the shot spotters, do you guys have, so it's $2 million for police department, but do you have an exact amount of how many new or additional shot spotters you'll be able to get?
I will get that breakdown from Joe Cecil for you all.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Digital infrastructure, data analysis, and cybersecurity.
So, councilors, from your review of the ARPA funding, there's only a few places where infrastructure is appropriate for direct spending. Water is one, broadband is one, public safety is another, and then the fourth, is in cybersecurity enhancements. So, hardening our cybersecurity, we are, I would say, in very good shape. We are in better shape than a lot of other municipalities our size. We've had a significant number of attacks in the region, some successful, some not successful. We'd like to continue our track record. So being able to upgrade some of our digital solutions. In fact, I think one of the items that will be on the council's agenda, upcoming agenda, will be a digital solution around diversity and inclusion. Those are allowable kinds of expenses in here, but most of these dollars will be spent in two places: hardware, software around cybersecurity, and then also our ability to collect, analyze, and report data across the city's existing infrastructure. And Councilor Hogan, if I may, because I know you're so interested in both the arts and compliance, I need to point out, in the absence of Budget Director, not in the absence of Budget Director Rudd, in front of Budget Director Rudd, we are funding artists, not art. So when you are putting together your thoughts about that, it's important to remember, we cannot finance art projects. We can finance artists and art groups under ARPA.
Artists who produce art, that hopefully it'll be.
From a compliance standpoint, I don't really care what they produce.
Being a practical politician.
Yes, I know you do. Right, I know you do. But my point is simply, in order to be compliant, we need to be, the money has to go to an artist as opposed to an art project.
Hopefully it'll be a local artist.
I'm sorry?
Hopefully it'll be a local, within the limits of the city.
It would need to be compliant.
So we'd have to be a city resident?
It would have to be, likely a city resident.
Boy, that likely sounds like a politician.
I'm leaving myself a little bit of room for error because it could conceivably be a city arts and culture organization that receives the dollars as well.
Oh, so not an artist.
It has to go to an industry that has been hard struck by the pandemic.
You're all over the place, right?
No, not at all. It's actually pretty clear cut.
It is.
It's actually pretty clear cut.
Yeah.
Maybe after a dozen Budweisers it would have been.
There you go. Anything on the cybersecurity? Thanks.
Sanitation and recycling carts and arms.
So this funding is part of our ongoing effort to update our solid waste operation. As I think the council knows, we are currently engaged with Barton and LaJudas on a year-long study of them evaluating our current system, looking at workers' comp, looking at the character of the streets, looking at the vehicles, and so we anticipate being able to share a drafted plan, or I think the plan with the public before the end of the year, and obviously the council would be a key partner in that, and we would preview the plan and share it with you in advance of that. So this certainly, we don't anticipate would fund the entire project, but we're also in active conversations with New York State to help us fill in the rest of the gap for what we anticipate the entire cost would be. So obviously the goal here hopefully is to semi-automate our operations, whether or not arms and tippers are going to work on each one of our city streets as part of the plan. Obviously some streets are, having lived on Tennyson, I don't know how that would work, just in terms of the ability of traffic to get by and all that jazz. So, you know, that's one of the things that Barton and Judas is looking at. Then obviously, ideally, that we would provide receptacles to the residents for trash and recycling so that they're consistent, that everybody has one. We think hopefully that will cut down on litter, the amount of litter that exists, just from improper containerization. So, you know, that's really the overall goal with the project.
Are the carts for trash or recycling or both?
Both. I mean, we would probably have, I think not having, you know, seen what the study says, the way it works in a lot of other municipalities is that they're one for trash and there's one for recycling.
So what does 1.5 million get us?
So it would be partially on the way to what we anticipate will be a $5 million project.
And that's for trash, recycling, and arms?
And for arms. I mean, obviously, we'll know that, you know, once we have the study in place, but at least initially in initial conversations, that's the direction we believe we're headed.
So are there certain neighborhoods we would pilot this first, or we would all wait until after the study?
That's part of it too, is just looking at, they're also going to be providing us best practices in terms of, you know, do we just rip off the Band-Aid and do it all at once? Do we phase it in, and how do you select which neighborhoods you phase it in? Because obviously each neighborhood has its own challenges. I'm not sure there's one that's a total microcosm of the entire city, but that's part of the ongoing conversations as well. So I don't mean to be vague, it's just that the study is ongoing, and once we have it, you know, finalized, then I'll be in a better position to have more detailed conversations about it.
Sorry, Director, when did you estimate that the study would be done?
Before the end of the year.
So most likely this would probably be the second tranche of funding, you'd imagine?
It might be, or, you know, as we're also in conversations with New York State about some available funding sources that we think might be applicable to fill the gap.
So this might be something that we look for other money to leverage with.
Certainly, yeah. And then obviously that, you know, having the study in place puts us in a good position so that if there are adjustments we need to make, you know, if there's an additional gap that we need to make in the capital plan, you know, then we can do that as well. But we should know well in time for that whether or not the state funding is an option.
Does the recycling carts, like, we know we want to do that without the study anyway, right?
What's that?
The recycling carts, I feel like we have a pretty good understanding that we want to do that, right?
Right.
Like, is that something we would just start earlier, or what would our?
I don't see why we couldn't. You know, it's just really looking at whether or not, because the whole idea, you know, aside from making this more efficient, a better and clearer experience for the residents, it's also, you know, sanitation far outweighs almost any other division, I think, in terms of workers' comp. And so the amount of labor that goes into our sanitation workers lifting those carts, you know, is something that is, at least for me, of equal importance to the residents' experience with sanitation. And so, you know, we really need to rein in those costs, and you know, I'm sure all of you have seen how sanitation operates. It's really no wonder that we have so many workers' comp issues related there because of just the type of labor. So we really want to try and get away from people lifting up these heavy carts and dumping them into the trucks. So, you know, the trucks need to be outfitted to allow for that.
So these arms, would be probably repaired by a local vendor, right?
It might be. I mean, that's part of the conversation too, is, you know, and obviously Rich DeVesti will be part of the conversation of, you know, what's the smartest option for arms. And arms, like I said, arms aren't going to work everywhere. Some of our streets are too narrow, or the traffic, you know, it's just not going to work there. But, you know, there's also the tippers where, you know, it lifts up and you take care of it that way, and it's not armed. So those are the things that BNL is looking into, and those are the things that, you know, we should know within the next few months.
And our savings would be in, well, we lose 20 guys in DPW, or how would that work?
No, I mean, I think the idea would be, you know, the savings, at least immediately, I would hope, would be in workers' comp, just the amount of money that we spend not only in workers' comp, but then everything that comes from that. Then, you know, the then you have people out, so you have less staff, so then the staff that are there are working longer hours, and, you know, obviously sometimes there are overtime costs, or sometimes now those people are overextended, and so they get injured, and then, you know, it's just kind of this constant cycle in sanitation. So, you know, I think the hope also is that if we're able to provide these carts that everybody uses, you got to use it to get it picked up. They have tops on them, so, you know, as you know, in certain neighborhoods, particularly the north side with the Monday morning cleanup, if people don't use a trash can, you know, the bag is completely pulled apart by the time sanitation comes through on Monday. So we're hoping that, you know, hopefully things will look a little bit cleaner and we can spend a little bit less time doing litter pickups once sanitation comes through. So, so the initial plan, and I think that's what the funding is initially for, is that we would provide, you know, again, not committing to it, but I think the idea is that as a startup, we would provide the carts. And then obviously if they're damaged, if they're suddenly lost, you know, then we would have to work through, obviously with the council, what a replacement plan would look like. How do we charge people, you know, if they need to have their cart replaced.
Timing would be longer, correct? Because now it seems like it's quicker because they're just grabbing the trash, throwing it in there.
Yeah, I mean, and that's part of it too, is just whether or not, you know, will sanitation as an operation will fundamentally have to change. You know, right now by noon-ish, usually they're done with the routes. It might take a little bit longer now to do that, and hopefully Steve Barnum is listening here. But, you know, that's just the nature of how, you know, if we can, again, you know, employee safety is really one of the driving factors for me. If we can make this a safer operation for our employees,
It was him.
then hopefully we can, you know, but yeah, the workday might change. It might not look the same way as it does right now.
And then the arms, I would imagine, are just gonna sit the cart down. It's not gonna toss my cart.
That would be the hope, yes. Is that, you know, less tossing of recycling bins.
Okay.
All
Anything
right,
else?
thank you.
Well, that is all the items, so I appreciate everyone's help, and we'll